So near the end of 2022, while browsing around my usual Twitter haunts for inspiration on what to cover on the channel next, I stumbled across, they're a movement, influencer and small distribution company called SOV Horror. And I kind of fell in love with their company mission statement. They wanted to preserve and promote SOV cinema. In particular, they were keen to release movies that were either obscure to the point that they'd fully dropped off the map, or had only previously had very low print run releases. These included well-known filmmakers in the field, such as Chris LaMartina or Chris Seaver, with some titles not really seeing the light of day in at least a decade or three. So, I checked them out, found a few titles I liked, bookmarked them, and figured that at some point I'd get round to picking up a few because they were quite passionate about what they did and seemed like a good bunch. Then, as the year came to a close, SOV Horror announced that it was formally closing its doors on its distribution operation, and that basically, when these films were gone, they were gone. Well, as you can imagine, this changed my priorities somewhat, and I must have sank somewhere in the region of £300 to £400, that's $370 to $470 for you US folks, across two orders that pretty much bought up more or less everything that I'd figure I'd have even the vaguest interest in. Partly because these films were very unlikely to be seen again when the doors closed, and partly because I liked these guys. And in the post they made regarding the closure, they hinted at potentially moving into other SOV ventures in future, and I figured having a bit of a splurge would probably help towards that. Then the date they said they were closing came and went, and they didn't close. I can't say I'm particularly mad about it because I agree with their cause and think they're a force for good in getting SOV out there to a wider audience, but at the same time, at the time that I placed those orders, I didn't really have that kind of money to throw around, and it would have been easier on me financially to have spread this out a bit rather than panic buying, because when they're gone, they're gone. But I guess that's the way of the world. Not ideal, and it absolutely could have been communicated better, but what can you do? In either case, it left me with an abundance of weird, wonderful and interesting SOV flicks to check out, most packed with special features and most with some rather interesting USPs. So, I figured with most of these SOV releases running to less than 60 minutes long, rather than just doing super short solo reviews of each of them, I'd pair them up and do double feature reviews. And kicking these off, we have a pair of movies that are quite literally out of this world and beyond our dimension. Because for our first venture into this lovely label, we'll be checking out a couple of pictures from SOV stalwart Joe Sherlock. A bit of a mammoth in the SOV scene, with 32 directing credits and 28 writing credits, mostly based in SOV, early DV cinema, and even recently a bit of the old digital business. He's hit quite a few different genres, from comedy to horror sci-fi, and even dabbled in the erotic. But a lot of his movies tend to have an element of comedy to them, whether it's ultra dark and subtle elements to more serious narratives, or full-blown slapstick. He's probably best known for the non-Barry J. Gillis Things movies. Channel 99 is another, and most recently he worked on an entry in the Axe Grinder franchise. He's been making movie magic since the early to mid-90s, and kicking things off, we're going to be taking a look at his first actual full proper movie. 1996's Dimension of Blood. It's my understanding that Joe had shot some shorts before making this movie. He'd had a little bit of practice before the jump. As such, Dimension of Blood kind of feels like someone feeling out how a longer form movie is supposed to work, both on a script level and a technical level. You gotta bear in mind, a lot of this was learning on the fly, and someone's first foray into filmmaking is almost always going to be a little rough and ready. Though credit to Joe here, his first long-run piece is trying to be as grand as possible given the no-budget nature of the thing. The film follows Dr. Mobius, a scientist and doctor currently investigating the strange appearance of several unusual life forms that have started appearing in random places across the globe. They appear to be alive, but don't appear to have any kind of function or purpose. They don't even appear to have anything resembling a brain. But Mobius is intrigued by their unusualness. We're then greeted by a Dollar Tree Criswell, who basically informs us that we're entering the Twilight Zone. He's never heard or seen from again. Anyway, with that out of the way, we're then better introduced to the Doctor and his work at the Biogen Research Lab in Corn Valley, Oregon. Dr. Mobius calls fellow researcher and love interest Rachel to ask if she'll swing by his lab as soon as possible, as he wants her to help verify and help locate some data that he's working on. He also tells her to keep the meeting quiet. When Rachel gets to the lab, Dr. Mobius basically fills her in on the history of the organisms and says that apparently they're highly classified due to their nature. He also explains that he doesn't think the creatures are of Earth origin, and he's convinced that he's actually part of a CIA black project because of how top secret the whole thing is. He does, however, ask Rachel if she'd mind looking into a few pieces of information he's managed to find about the shady payees, and Rachel agrees to take a look. Later that night, Mobius receives a phone call from another doctor by the name of Joe, who tells him to meet him at a restaurant near 7th Street because he has something urgent to tell him about his ongoing research. Mobius heads to the restaurant, but Joe gets tailed by a man in black who basically murders him and hides him in a closet. After Joe was a no-show, Mobius goes home and calls his house, where a friend of Joe's answers and basically says she hasn't seen him. We then segue into a random kill scene involving a janitor. No idea why it happens, but it does. The next day, Mobius gets a letter. It's from Joe. Apparently, he had a failsafe in case the men in black got to him before he had a chance to speak to Mobius, and inside the letter is an address to a PO box, 2 keys to get into the box, and instructions claiming that the truth lies in a bag inside there. While leaving work that evening, a man in black corners Mobius and tells him that he's to have a complete research document prepared and ready by no later than Friday for them to review. No excuses. Mobius doesn't appreciate the attitude, but says whatever to get the guy off his back. He heads to the PO box, and inside is a small bag containing several letters discussing the project that Mobius is working on. There's some newspaper articles about a fire at a research facility and the contact details of a mysterious woman called Annabelle, who may hold the key to all of this. And so, armed with this lead, Dr. Mobius arranges a meeting with Annabelle. But is she all that she seems? Well, if you want to find out the truth and more, you better nab yourself a copy of Dimension of Blood. And for a first attempt at writing a script longer than 5 to 10 minutes, it's absolutely a mixed bag, but I think there's probably more good here than bad. The broad plot is fine for a shorter movie. The plot of man getting sucked into a thread where he learns something he shouldn't and then tries to shut down a shady organisation while being chased by members of said shady organisation has been around since the very early days of cinema. It's easily filled a feature-length runtime many times over in the last 100 years quite successfully. But here, while this would have been a really solid, very nicely handled script at 15 to 25 minutes, unfortunately, because of the limitations of the production, at 35 minutes long, it's got the DNA of a solid enough idea, but unfortunately it's bloated out with repetitive and, while not dull, certainly not relevant scenes that are just there to get the runtime over that 30-minute mark. The entire plot of Mobius going to see Joe loops 2 or 3 times and probably adds about 7 minutes to the runtime. That may not seem like a lot, but when that makes up over 1/7 of your movie, that's not great. There's a sequence in which a janitor fantasizes about a biker girl and gets picked off by an agent, and that takes another 3 to 5 minutes. It's cool, but it adds nothing to the actual plot progression again, and that's another 1/7 or so off the runtime. Of what's left, I'd say there's maybe another 5 or so minutes that consist of an extended dream sequence and some idle phone calls, and what's left past that is a rather lumpy, poorly paced but tonally consistent movie that clearly has an influence from Halloween 3 about it. It's engaging enough to just about keep me on board, but problematic enough that I couldn't outright love it. The dialogue's maybe a little rough around the edges, but for the most part it holds up, and there was nothing exceptionally egregious about it. I think maybe a couple of the deliveries don't quite cut the mustard, but in terms of what's written on the page, it's halfway decent, I'd say. On the direction, for SOV, this is kind of middle of the road. Joe and his crew, for a first time, have managed to make a work that feels fairly consistent in terms of world building and technical ability, barring the janitor murder, which feels very out of place compared to everything else. But otherwise, it kind of hits the mark of being a relatively solid, if not somewhat generic, work. At this point, I wouldn't say Joe's found his voice as a filmmaker, but given this was his first work, I wouldn't expect that. It looks the part in terms of how professional SOV movies looked at the time, but it doesn't go much beyond that. The Cine is a bit hit and miss as well. On the plus side, there's some nice experimentation with some solid attempts at freehand panning shots. They also seemed quite aware of how edits work because there's plenty of B-roll to help keep this thing fairly fluid. They even utilise a couple of practical effects that are pretty generic in the world of movie making, but a nice touch when you consider that a lot of SOV movies didn't even do that. On the other hand, however, some shots don't quite land as intended. Some have ended up a little shaky, and there feels like there's a bit of a lack of colour or distinction to really help stylise the thing. There's a half-hearted attempt at trying to make green and red a thing, but I don't think they really own it in the way a more experienced filmmaker would. Performance-wise, again, it's a bit of a mixed ability room, and I'd go as far as to say, if I'm being honest, it's mixed to poor. Tom Schafer failed to really set my socks on fire as Dr. Mobius. His character's aiming a bit for the Dr. Chalice from Halloween 3 vibes, but he's just too softly spoken and worried sounding to ever really be able to pull it off. A lot of the time he's reading his lines from cue cards just off screen, he doesn't really animate much across the runtime. For a leading role, that's not ideal. Brenda Buettner as Rachel is way too muted and flat across here. Admittedly, she didn't have great lines to begin with, but it takes her nearly 30 of the 35 minutes to warm up, and by the time she does hit her stride, the movie's over and she's advanced from not good to passable. Surprisingly, Joe Sherlock as the Man in Black is probably the best performance in this thing. And that's because they had to play a silent, moody type who acts a bit like the Terminator. It's not the easiest performance, but it's one of the easier to replicate, and he does a fine enough job of it. And finally, the soundtrack. It sounds near identical to the synth work on 1989's Things. Its low budget, mid-quality, whimsical and menacing sounding synth pangs, I can't deny it works for this movie, absolutely, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's well put together. And as always with a lot of SOV flicks, the broader audio quality is a bit of a patchwork. Some's pretty clean and solid, some is pretty inaudible, but they're working with what they can. All in all, for a first time out of the gate, while I can't recommend checking this one out, I did have an okay time with it. I felt it was a bit overlong and could have maybe had a bit more of a creative vision beyond the functionality that they're shooting for, but compared to some people's first starts, this is pretty impressive in its scale and aspirations. To the point that, while I can't offer this to your broader cult fan, if you've ever seen Joe's other movies and enjoyed them, this one might be an oddity to add to your watch list. (1999's) We Need Earth Women is, for a lack of a better descriptive, an MST3K inspired sexual sci-fi comedy written and directed by Joe Sherlock. And you may want to buckle up for this one because it's a bit of a trip to be sure. The basic plot of the movie revolves around two alien technicians who are sent on a mission by the Galzonkian Zoo to find a suitable woman to replace the one that sadly expired while in captivity. Along the way, they'll learn about women's particulars via copies of Jugs magazine, they'll catch one lady sunbathing but figure she isn't quite right, and chase down several more while dressed as alligator people. Eventually they arrive at the perfect specimen, Jennifer, a sex phone operator who's in an open relationship who's looking for something more. When the aliens drop down to pick her up, initially she's terrified. Then she realises the abduction could be a ticket out of the sex line business because she could cash in on her abduction stories. Her dreams of cashing in are cut short, however, when she's told that she's going to an intergalactic zoo where she'll be fed, watered, looked after, and used in breeding experiments with both male captives and other species, much to her disgust. That is, until she gets it on with one of the technicians, at which point her attitude changes. Though, in the midst of the technician having a bit of bouncy, the navigation goes off track and the ship crash lands in a lake on an alien planet, which leads us to a fight for survival. Will the gang make it off the planet and get to the zoo in one piece? Will Jennifer's boyfriend even know she's missing? And just who is the mysterious cloaked fighter? All this and more will be answered if you check out We Need Earth Women. And right off the bat, I've gotta say this is not highbrow entertainment by any stretch of the imagination. What we have here is an ultra goofy, heavily inspired by MST3K 40-minute runaround that won't win any script writing awards anytime soon, but absolutely won me over with its light-heartedness and general charisma. The script feels like a total dog's dinner of ideas and weirdness, and that's largely because this is a recycled movie. What I mean by that is, barring anything featuring the alien technicians and Jennifer, and anything after the gang crash into the lake, all the footage in this movie has been recycled from various other places. There's deleted scenes from Joe's other movies, extended sequences, outtakes, test footage, offcuts from his friends' movies. Basically, he just pooled a ton of offcut footage together and shaped it into a meat patty of a movie. And I think that's actually kind of genius. It means that while there technically isn't a proper end-to-end script for this thing, it's resulted in an entertaining watch that's managed to keep costs down while maximising what would have otherwise been a load of binned material. The stuff that is written for the movie exclusively is fun, light-hearted, maybe not the greatest paced work in the world, but I had fun with it. I've seen it 3 times now, and most importantly, it feels kind of like it comes from the heart of the filmmaker. Like, I get the feeling watching this like I now get Joe's sense of humour, or at least one aspect of it. And that's the kind of thing I love about these kinds of movies. It's that sometimes, while they won't give you a clear line into the director's head, they'll almost certainly give you some kind of aspect as to how they operate. And I think that's a sign of a good piece. Obviously, with this being a recycled movie, a lot of the act structuring is down to the alien spaceship sequences, and I feel they act almost like tentpoles for this production. They kind of pin the footage together and let the whole thing breathe. The pacing's a bit lumpy, but that's to be expected, and the dialogue's an absolute hoot. Seriously, it's dry, sarcastic, and sometimes downright absurd. And I really loved that while the film was daffy, it didn't rely on nudity, base-level toilet humour, or offence to try and sell the film as a comedy. There's a couple of sex scenes that are comedically played, but they're not where the humour begins and ends. It's much more reliant on just crafting well-timed gags and an almost cartoonish humour to help things rumble along. And I think it does a great job in doing that. The direction isn't the sharpest in the world. In fact, if I'm being honest, this feels almost like a bit of a step back from Dimension of Blood in terms of coherency on a technical level. That being the case for the recycled footage is understandable because, well, it was from the chopping room floor, but the newly shot stuff, particularly the location work, just doesn't really hold together quite as well as Joe's other works. There doesn't seem to be as much emphasis on getting the lighting to line up with the Cine. The Cine itself feels a little rough and ready, and it doesn't really feel like he had a clear creative vision for what he wanted to do with this thing. It feels like goofing, which is absolutely fine if you want to just hang with your friends and make something goofy, but as a retail release, this was something I kinda took a bit of reservation with. I feel like with just a bit more thought and attention to the edit, that this could have been a bit more of a stylised, solid work all in. I can't really talk about cast direction either given the nature of this thing, but at least for the new sections, I'll say it may not be anything blow your socks off amazing, but at least Joe got the cast to move around their space a bit and do stuff. I've seen way too many movies where people just have the cast bolted to the spot. And given there's quite a bit of physical humour in this thing, while I don't think the general cast direction was brilliant, I think he actually handled the comedy side of things quite well. Same goes for the Cine really, which is a bit of a game of two halves. On the one hand, the model shot work here is positively MST3K-tastic, and arguably some of the best parts of this movie both in terms of style, lighting and composition. The live action footage is a mixed bag, as to be expected, but the stuff that was shot specifically for this movie, that isn't model work, is a bit rushed in my opinion. There's no emphasis on colour for stylisation, the lighting is a little blown out, flat, or in some cases scenes are a bit underlit, which doesn't help set any kind of mood for the piece. The editing, while bob on for the comedic moments, I can't fault that, is lacklustre in other regards. I spotted at least 3 or 4 instances where scenes would start with way too much lead-in or cut before the cast had finished their lines, which was a bit of a shame really. Performance-wise, look, this thing's a no-budget comedy with a cast consisting of mainly friends, family and early in their career actors. But this thing is playing to their strengths in that sense. The MST3K style of humour isn't heavily reliant on highly animated and naturally charismatic performances. Quite the opposite in fact. In that sense, Joe here has turned a problem into a solution, turning cast members who aren't particularly animate in front of the camera and can't really deliver their lines with an enthusiastic energy into the perfect cast to take on this type of comedy. Whether it's accidental or not, I can't say for sure, but I really enjoyed pretty much every performance in this thing and giggled like an idiot throughout. And finally, the soundtrack. Honestly, it's not that memorable. but it's got, for lack of a better word, a sort of surf rocky twang about it, but played via synths that I really kinda got on with. The ADR is still pretty much all over the place, but given this was a late 90s no-budget feature that was really more of a technical experiment than anything else, I can kinda give it a pass for that. It's not the worst that I've seen, it's far from the best, and honestly, it's not the selling point of the movie, so it's kinda negligible. Finding exact first release dates for both Dimension of Blood and We Need Earthwomen has been kinda difficult to pin down. These almost certainly had separate DVD releases at some point in the 2000s or 2010s, and I'm pretty sure that We Need Earthwomen might have had a VHS release. But I've tried Googling for information on both, and other than DVD covers for both, I can't find any physical information on their releases. If you do happen to know anything about these titles and their early releases, please let me know in the comments, as I'd love to find out more about both of them. The first documented release of these films that I came across came in the form of SOV Horror's SOV Drive-In Double Feature DVD, which paired the two up on a single disc with a decent raft of extras in 2021. And I think they've done a pretty solid job here. Given the nature of videotape, there isn't really much that could be done to clean these up, but other than some mild pixelation issues in places, likely due to compression, on the whole they both look really decent, and SOV have done a great job in packaging the two together for this set. Extras include commentaries with Joe Sherlock on both features, a making of for both films, a behind the scenes for Dimension of Blood, and stills and trailers. It's absolutely the most comprehensive release these films have ever had, and this release does go on sale infrequently on the SOV Horror store, and when it does, I absolutely recommend picking a copy up. Link in the description. Ultimately, while it's cheesy as hell and not the greatest made picture in the world, I had an absolute ball with We Need Earthwomen. I was honestly stunned at how dumb this thing got, and I giggled like an idiot throughout. This is a movie with heart, and it's clear to feel the director's joy shining through in how this has been assembled. A very interesting technical experiment, and primed with a decent comedy hit rate. If you can overlook its technical and stylistic faults, this thing's a hoot, and one I definitely recommend.